5. Edward A. Sheldon, Oswego and the Secular School. Edward Austin Sheldon, 1823 to 1897, best illustrates why state support of education triumphed in the United States. Many of the early champions of secular education were Protestant clergymen, very often of unorthodox tendencies, and Unitarians were notable in their zeal for all kinds of statist activities, with education gaining particular emphasis. But Sheldon, who had planned to enter the ministry, came from a home dedicated to Calvinism, of the New England type. His father gave a set of Emmons's sermons to each child, had daily prayer with the family, and left a lasting mark on his son in Sabbatarian observances. Referring to the quote-unquote Calvinistic doctrines of his father's faith, Sheldon observed, "Rightly interpreted and understood, I doubt whether there is any escape from the conclusions to which these doctrines led. At any rate, such was our faith, and having been so trained, it never ceases to influence our minds and our lives." Sheldon, moreover, married the daughter of Dr. Ezra Stiles, again reinforcing his roots in New England conservatism. And yet this man, whose background in faith should have predisposed him to be an outstanding opponent of the new education, was one of its greatest champions. Although the Oswego, New York Normal School, 1861, was preceded by several much earlier normal schools in this country, its influence was such that it came to be regarded as the mother of normal schools, and its graduates played an important part in the histories of many subsequent state normal schools. William Torrey Harris, on the occasion of Oswego's 25th anniversary, spoke of his visit to the school as a pilgrimage to the shrine at Oswego. Hollis spoke of the work of Oswego as the dawn of childhood's day in America. The contemporary neglect of Oswego is in part due to the fact that the school's contribution to education did not include the currently central emphasis on social democracy. But Sheldon is important for an understanding of American education. His autobiography, it can be added, is one of the most readable of all educational documents and is an invaluable document, better knowledge of which would correct many misconceptions concerning life and thought in conservative circles in Western New York. Sheldon, through Oswego, popularized Pestalozzi's educational philosophy in America and naturalized it. Although this was not without criticism, both in Oswego and in educational circles, his work was eminently successful. From 1861 to 1886, until Francis W. Parker appeared on the educational scene, Oswego dominated American education. Thus, for 25 years, Sheldon and his school were the major influence in American education. For Parker's work, Sheldon felt only enthusiasm and regarded Parker as a great man. The criticisms of Oswego's principles were directed locally against its deviation from basic education, its frills, its increased cost, and its adherence to Pestalozzi. In 1872, the schools of Oswego rejected the Oswego Normal School's principles to return to the old 3 R's. In educational circles, H.B. Wilbur attacked the Pestalozzi principles as a mixture of truisms and vague generalizations. In methodology, Sheldon sought to follow Pestalozzi faithfully. His union of evangelical piety with this methodology is often apparent. For example, in the lesson on parchment, he concluded, "I took the sacred book of God to keep, to fear, to read it free, but holy martyrs shed their blood to win this word of life for me." The application of the lesson on the plat stressed at length God's goodness. Lead the children to trace the hand of God in all this. If we see anything beautifully fitted for some purpose, we conclude it was made for that purpose. God's wisdom, benevolence, and power to be shown in the adaptation of all the parts of the animal to its habits. Sheldon was not a convert to state-supported and oriented education because of Pestalozzi, but rather turned to Pestalozzi's principles as the ready-made philosophy for a position he had already come to champion. Sheldon stated quite candidly, "Other men had thought and planned everything before me. Pestalozzi covered the whole field of educational reform long before my day, but I had never heard of Pestalozzi. I had read very little and knew nothing of educational theories and principles. My knowledge of educational principles was largely intuitive. I do not speak this in a boastful way, but rather in the spirit of humility. What little of educational knowledge I may have possessed was given to me." It was thus clearly not Pestalozzi who supplied Sheldon with his zeal for state-supported education. Sheldon, moreover, felt that he had come intuitively to the same position previously, and then found in Pestalozzi the mature formulation of his feelings and desires. What, then, was the origin of Sheldon's activity and of his concern? It is described by Sheldon in a letter from Oswego to his sister, November the 23rd, 1848. Sheldon, on attending a mission Sabbath school soon after his arrival to Oswego, was surprised, indicative of the fact that it had not previously been a normal condition, at the large number of children 8 and 10 years old who could not read their ABC. He and his chum, making both plans and estimates for a school, then got upon our knees and implored the blessing of God to give it success. We first introduced the subject in a public manner at a prayer meeting. There appointed committees to make further investigations. The result was, further, meetings of the citizens generally. Christians are praying for it in private and public. Our ministers are all urging it from the pulpit. Several discourses have been based entirely on the subject. The popular support as the school began, and as it became a part of a state-supported school system later, and as the normal school came into being, was very great. The break with the people came only as the ideas of Pestalozzi introduced what the citizenry felt were alien and useless concepts of education into the schools. The method of pedagogy at first was missionary zeal and a love of children, and the like temper in Pestalozzi commended his philosophy later to Sheldon. To understand the origins of state-supported education in the United States, it is necessary to recognize its close relationship to the breakdown of Puritanism. On the one hand, many of the enemies of Puritanism saw in the public schools a new religion and a new established church whereby the commonwealths could be regenerated and sanctified. On the other hand, despite some opposition within its ranks, much of Puritan latter-day quote-unquote orthodoxy saw the schools as a new means for reviving the Holy Commonwealth as now interpreted. American thoughts had begun its return to the thoroughly English premise of one undivided realm, church and state being opposite sides of a common coin. Calvinism was in part disliked because of the growing rejection of the divided realm which Calvinistic polity created. The emphasis in the new thought, whether in its Orthodox or Unitarian formulation, was less on piety, a product of supernatural grace, and more on moralism, works, human activity. The natural order thus gained increasing priority. As the New England theology itself changed from piety to moralism, it became progressively easier for the Holy Commonwealth to be seen as primarily manifest in the state as the truly Catholic realm, because it was the ethical or moral realm. The weakening of the church covenant was hastened by the Sheldon family's spiritual guide, Nathaniel Emmons, who reduced the church to a voluntary society formed by voluntary compact. The church thus ceased to exist as a necessary body created by Christ and became a body created by men, so that a new institution, one more in keeping with the primarily moral needs of the Holy Commonwealth, was urgently needed. Chard Powers Smith quite rightly identifies the successful crusade for its state-supported education as the accomplishment of a transformed and renaissance Puritanism, one rapidly making its influence felt throughout the United States. The extensive emphasis on moralism and patriotism in the state-supported schools was in fulfillment of this purpose in their creation to become the quote-unquote Catholic Church of the people of America and the moral identity of the body politic. This aspect of educational history is in abundant evidence. It has been neglected only because, while latter-day Puritans helped powerfully to make state support a reality, the schools fell steadily into the hands of the anti-Puritans. As a result, the school continues today as the true established church of these United States, dedicated to a Catholic faith, which is no longer semi-Christian moralism, but social morality and social democracy. When Sheldon began his ragged school, he continued, during the summer months, such Sunday missionary activity as distributing religious papers and tracts to sailors and boatmen. He also visited the jail for a similar purpose and for religious conversation and instruction. His primary mission, however, became increasingly education. It is no wonder that, when state-supported schools were subsequently introduced into Oswego, taking over such missions as Sheldon's ragged school, many adherents of the Church of Rome opposed it, in Sheldon's words, as a Protestant movement to build up Protestant institutions to be paid for by the Catholics. This objection was raised very widely, and with justice, careful as the Protestants usually were to keep this church out of the schools. The whole conception of the schools was that of the Protestant moral establishment in the new Holy Commonwealth, the United States. State unification was thus very quickly championed in the various states and by Sheldon in New York. Local support was not enough. A statewide unification was needed to provide the state with a single system, one state, and one unified school system. Federal support and control very early had its champions. To this day, the developed idea of the Holy Commonwealth is so strong in popular thinking that power, distributed and rightly so in the hands of the Church, is freely and religiously granted to the state. Educators have had no doubts, unhappily, of the ability of the state to use unlimited powers beneficently. Elwood P. Cubberley, for example, approvingly titled a major chapter of his influential History of Education, 1920, "Education becomes a national tool." In terms of this, much of the contemporary criticism of the schools by conservatives becomes understandable. This, quote, established church, end quote, has been captured, and they seek a restoration of an older order and doctrine. By holding to the same status doctrine of the established school, they are unable to attack effectively concepts which are the logical developments of that establishment. The order of society, as seen in the United States from the colonial era to the present, has taken three main forms. In the first form, best exemplified among the Puritans, although in varying degrees or manifestations common to the English colonies, the pattern can be summarized thus: the triune God, the Bible, the covenant of grace, the Holy Commonwealth, limited, separate powers. Church, the religious covenant. Grace as the source of liberty. The personal covenant of grace. State, the social covenant. Law as the condition of liberty. With the breakdown of Puritanism, the Unitarian Church came forth with a variation of this concept, one which many, like Sheldon, followed as the best version of the old faith. By its very enthusiasm for statist education, Unitarianism also helped materially to make the school the new established church of the realm, the mother, teacher, saviour of the flock. The second pattern, to which most elements in society made some contribution, although Calvinistic critics like Charles Hodge were sharply critical of statist education, was as follows: God, the higher law concept, constitutionalism. The established school, learning as power and freedom. The state, natural law as man's charter of liberty. The steady decline of religious faith, of the higher law concept, and of constitutionalism, and their progressive replacement by faith in democracy, gave rise to a further interpretation of the Holy Commonwealth. The higher law of equality, democracy, school, social living as the new covenant and means of grace, state, social legislation as the road to societal salvation, to paradise on earth. All three are interpretations of the Holy Commonwealth. The first, as Trinitarian, had a multiplicity of powers. The Unitarian version had a unity of powers, a return to the unitary concept of ancient society, but with the Puritan zeal for the establishment of God's kingdom on earth. Herman Melville, at the age of 30, declared, "We are the heirs of all time, and with all nations we divide our inheritance. On this Western Hemisphere, all tribes and peoples are forming into one federated whole, and there is a future which shall see the strange children of Adam restored as the old hearthstone in Eden." This religious purpose, the creation of a new Eden, was the purpose and calling of the Holy Commonwealth. The new version was, however, an ancient heresy, one often challenged by Roman Catholic thought of the Galatian tradition and by Calvinism, but too often accepted by churches from early times to the present. Moreover, vast segments of Protestantism, accentuated in its vagaries by means of Arminianism, Pietism, have steadily surrendered to the state areas that biblically belong to Christian man, and had in the Middle Ages been claimed by the Church. 1. Marriage laws and regulations. 2. The control of wealth. And 3. The control of education. As theology declined in most churches and sociology became the major quote-unquote Christian concern, the churches became steadily more irrelevant in that school and state were now the truly effective institutions, and the role of a harmless club became progressively the function of the church. Meanwhile, men, hoping in happy unity to move forward to Eden, found themselves drifting closer to Babel and confusion.